They didn't build cities, they didn't leave monuments, but for over a century, they controlled the heart of a continent. The Comanche weren't just survivors, they rewrote the rules of power. So why has almost everything you've heard about them been wrong? There are 15 facts that might change everything. The Comanche tribe emerged as a separate people in the early 1700s, breaking away from the Eastern Shoshone. They called themselves Numanu, which simply means the people. No fancy titles needed. They kept it simple. Originally, these groups lived in the northern Rocky Mountains as part of the larger Shoshone community. Life was good, but it was getting crowded. Resources were becoming harder to find, and young families were looking for new opportunities. It was like choosing between your hometown or moving where jobs ran on four legs. The decision to separate took years of discussion and planning. Some families wanted to stay with the traditional mountain lifestyle, while others were drawn to stories of vast grasslands and huge animal herds to the south. They basically sent scouts instead of checking online reviews. These early explorers found something amazing. Endless grasslands filled with buffalo herds so large they stretched beyond the horizon. The soil was rich, water was plentiful, and the climate was more favorable than harsh mountain winters. The timing couldn't have been better. But this southern migration was just the beginning. The real transformation was still coming. Around 1706, the Comanche acquired their first horses through trading and raiding, and everything changed overnight. These weren't just animals. They were freedom, power, and survival combined. The Comanche took to horses like teenagers take to smartphones, quickly and completely. The Spanish tried to keep horses away from native tribes, but that worked about as well as keeping water from flowing downhill. Learning to ride wasn't just about sitting on a horse and hoping for the best. Comanche children started learning horsemanship before they could walk properly. By their teens, they could perform tricks that would make modern circus riders jealous. They basically turned horses into four-legged motorcycles with better gas mileage. The impact on daily life was immediate and dramatic. Hunting became safer and more efficient. Travel that once took weeks now took days. War parties could strike fast and disappear before anyone could respond. But the Comanche didn't just learn to ride, they became master horse breeders. They developed techniques for selecting the best animals and improving their herds. Horse herds became the ultimate measure of wealth and status. This horse revolution made their next lifestyle choice inevitable, and what they chose would shock anyone who believed in staying put. The Comanche rejected permanent settlements completely, choosing instead to live in buffalo hide teepees that could be packed up and moved at a moment's notice. The Comanche invented mobile homes that were waterproof, wind-resistant, and payment-free. Breaking camp was a choreographed performance where everyone knew their role perfectly. Like a pit crew, except instead of changing tires, they packed entire civilizations. A camp of hundreds could be completely packed and moving within hours. They moved faster than most people decide what to watch on streaming. Their movement patterns followed sophisticated seasonal schedules based on buffalo migrations, weather patterns, and resource availability. They knew exactly when to leave each location, which routes to take, and where to set up next. This wasn't wandering. It was precise navigation. The logistics were mind-boggling. They had to transport people, food, tools, weapons, and ceremonial items while maintaining the ability to move quickly. Everything had to be lightweight, durable, and efficiently packed. This constant movement shaped every aspect of their culture, making them adaptable and incredibly skilled at reading the land. But all this mobility served one crucial purpose. The Comanche had a simple philosophy about buffalo: use everything, waste nothing. They turned every single part of these massive animals into something useful. Buffalo meat was processed multiple ways to prevent spoilage. Fresh meat was consumed immediately, but most was dried into jerky for long-term storage. These were their energy bars, except it tasted good and provided real nutrition. They ran the world's first recycling program, turning 2,000-pound animals into complete home sets. The hides were transformed into clothing, shoes, bedding, bags, and teepee covers. Sinew became their thread and rope. Buffalo bones were carved into weapons and household items. The horns were heated, shaped, and polished into cups, spoons, and decorative objects. Even the smallest parts had uses. Bones were ground into powder for making glue and paint. If buffalo had instruction manuals, the Comanche would have found uses for those too. The Comanche even crafted musical instruments from buffalo horns, creating sounds that could be heard across miles of prairie. But getting these valuable resources wasn't simple. Comanche buffalo hunting was a precisely coordinated military operation disguised as a food-gathering expedition. These hunters developed strategies that would impress modern special forces. They had better coordination than most sports teams, except mistakes meant getting trampled instead of losing. Every successful hunt required perfect teamwork and split-second timing. Hunters worked in organized groups with specific roles. They were buffalo psychologists, predicting stampedes at 30 miles per hour. Some positioned themselves to guide the herd's movement, others made the kills, and the rest prevented dangerous stampedes. Their weapons were specially designed for mounted hunting. Short bows could be drawn and fired rapidly while riding at full gallop. They turned hunting into an extreme sport before extreme sports existed. Understanding buffalo behavior was crucial. Experienced hunters could read the mood of an entire herd from subtle signs. They could determine from footprints how many animals were in a group and how long ago they had passed. The actual hunt had to be completed quickly before the herd scattered. This required incredible coordination between riders and years of practice, but buffalo weren't the only targets they pursued. Comanche raiding parties operated like elite military units with one major difference. They were more interested in acquiring horses and supplies than conquering territory. They put more thought into raids than most people put into vacation planning. Planning took weeks of preparation. Leaders studied targets, analyzed routes, and selected warriors based on specific skills. A well-executed Comanche raid was like magic. Horses disappeared and raiders vanished. The preferred attack time was night or early morning when enemies were least alert. They understood that surprise beat any weapon except maybe a really good horse. Their tactics emphasized speed, flexibility, and smart decision-making. If a raid encountered stronger resistance than expected, they would retreat immediately and try a different approach. They never committed to battles they couldn't win quickly. The targets were chosen for practical reasons. The Comanche wanted horses, weapons, and trade goods that would benefit their entire community. These raids also served as training for younger warriors, and all this military success was built on something even more impressive. Comancheria covered over 250,000 square miles across parts of modern-day Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Colorado. This wasn't just land. It was a complete economic system. They created the first subscription service, except instead of streaming movies, they streamed Great Plains access. The Comanche didn't think about territory in terms of fixed boundaries. They managed more land than most countries, except their capital was wherever they parked. Instead, they viewed Comancheria as a network of resources, seasonal camps, and travel routes. They ran the government without buildings, which probably saved a fortune on office rent. Different bands were responsible for different regions, but they maintained constant contact through messengers, trade networks, and seasonal gatherings. The borders were enforced through presence and reputation rather than walls. Strategic camp locations were chosen for multiple advantages. Sites near rivers provided water. Locations close to buffalo trails offered hunting opportunities. Positions that controlled travel routes gave them leverage in negotiations. For over a century, the Comanche maintained independence over this territory despite pressure from Spanish, Mexican, and American forces. Controlling all this land brought unexpected challenges. The Comanche were master diplomats and traders who maintained complex relationships with numerous tribes, colonial powers, and settlers. They understood that isolation meant weakness, while strategic alliances meant strength. They ran a massive trading company, except headquarters was wherever they camped that week. Trade relationships were essential to their way of life. They had better customer service than modern businesses, mainly because disappointing them meant unpleasant visits. The Comanche needed firearms, metal tools, cloth, and decorative items they couldn't produce themselves. In return, they offered horses, buffalo hides, and safe passage through their territory. They controlled highway tolls, except the highway was thousands of grassland miles. Treaties were viewed differently by the Comanche than by European governments. For them, treaties were flexible arrangements that could be modified if circumstances changed. This practical approach made sense for a mobile society. The practice of taking captives was more complex than it appeared. Many captives were eventually adopted into Comanche families and became full tribal members. Some chose to remain even when opportunities to return home became available. Managing all these relationships required something remarkable. Comanche society operated without kings, presidents, or permanent rulers. Instead, they developed a flexible leadership system where authority was earned through demonstrated skill and success. It was like board meetings, except instead of discussing profits, they decided camp moves and raids. Each band functioned independently with its own leaders and council of elders. These positions weren't inherited. You couldn't inherit leadership like family business. You had to be actually good. Decision-making happened through council discussions where different viewpoints were heard and debated. They had performance reviews, except unsuccessful leaders found themselves talking to empty teepees. The system was remarkably flexible. Different situations called for different types of leadership. A band might follow one person during hunting season, another during military campaigns, and a third during trade negotiations. There was no permanent capital or central government. The Comanche operated more like a confederation of allied groups than a unified state. This made them incredibly difficult for enemies to defeat. Leadership roles often overlapped and changed based on circumstances. This fluid system allowed talented individuals to rise regardless of their background, and one leader would become legendary for reasons nobody expected. During the mid-1800s, a leader named Quanah Parker emerged who would guide the Comanche through their most challenging period. Born around 1845, he represented both traditional Comanche ways and new realities. He was like a military genius who preferred horses over textbooks. His mixed heritage gave him unique insights into both Comanche and American cultures. During the Red River War, he emerged as one of the most effective Comanche military commanders. He understood both sides so well, he could have been a peace negotiator if people preferred talking. His success wasn't based on reckless bravery, but on intelligent strategy. He basically wrote asymmetric warfare books, except in horse tracks and arrow flights. The decision to end armed resistance wasn't made lightly. The buffalo herds were disappearing, the army was getting stronger, and the traditional lifestyle was becoming impossible to maintain. After the fighting ended, he became the primary spokesman during the difficult transition to reservation life. This required different skills than military leadership, negotiation, compromise, and finding ways to preserve culture. His leadership during the reservation period was remarkable. He promoted cattle ranching and supported education while insisting young people also learn traditional customs. But his strength came from something deeper than political skill. Comanche spiritual life wasn't confined to specific times or places. It was woven into every aspect of daily existence. Their religious beliefs provided guidance for everything from hunting to major life decisions. They had direct customer service with the universe, except hold time meant fasting in the wilderness. The Comanche believed in a creator spirit and various forces that influenced the natural world. These weren't distant deities, but active powers that could be communicated with. It was like spiritual retreats, except with rattlesnakes and no food instead of comfortable accommodations. Vision quests were serious spiritual undertakings where individuals would go alone into the wilderness to seek guidance. They basically invented extreme meditation before anyone knew what extreme sports were. Ceremonies marked every significant activity and life event. There were specific rituals for hunting, healing, coming of age, and preparing for war. These weren't just religious observances, but practical preparations. Sacred objects called medicine bundles contained items believed to hold spiritual power. Music and dance were essential elements of spiritual expression. Different songs were associated with different ceremonies, and drums were tools for communicating with the spirit world. These beliefs supported specialists who served their community in unique ways. Comanche medicine men served as the tribe's doctors, spiritual advisors, and keepers of medical knowledge, all in one role. They combined extensive knowledge of herbal remedies with spiritual healing practices. They ran the first holistic health clinics, except waiting rooms were open sky and prescription bottles were buffalo horn. The healing process typically involved both medicine and ceremony. They had better bedside manner than modern doctors, mainly because patients were neighbors and friends. Medicine men possessed detailed knowledge of plants and their properties, understanding which roots, leaves, and bark could treat different conditions. They were like walking medical textbooks, except they memorized everything and never needed lookups. Healing songs were considered as important as the medicines themselves. These songs were believed to have the power to drive away illness and restore health. Each medicine man had his own collection, memorized perfectly. Sweat lodge ceremonies were used for both physical and spiritual cleansing. These were carefully constructed ritual spaces where people could purify themselves of illness and spiritual problems. Dream interpretation was another crucial skill. Medicine men helped people understand the meaning of their dreams and visions, which were believed to contain important messages, but they weren't the only ones with essential skills that kept society running. Comanche women managed the practical infrastructure that kept their mobile society functioning smoothly. They were the engineers, manufacturers, and logistical coordinators who made nomadic life possible. They ran mobile architecture firms, except blueprints were memorized and construction materials were walking around eating grass. Teepee construction required specialized skills that took years to master. They built houses faster than modern construction crews, except their houses could relocate when neighborhoods got boring. Women had to select the right buffalo hides, prepare them properly, and sew them together in patterns that would create waterproof, wind-resistant shelters. They were like interior designers, contractors, and quality control inspectors surviving tornadoes and blizzards. Food processing and preservation was a constant responsibility. Women transformed fresh buffalo meat into jerky, pemmican, and other preserved foods that wouldn't spoil during long travels. Hide preparation was an art form that produced everything from soft clothing to tough containers and ropes. Child rearing involved teaching both practical skills and cultural knowledge. Women played significant roles in family and community decision-making. They were active participants in discussions about camp movements, trade relationships, and military decisions. All this knowledge was preserved through something truly remarkable. The Comanche language belongs to the Uto-Aztecan language family, connecting it to languages spoken across a vast area from the Great Basin to central Mexico. It was like having entire library systems stored in people's heads, except books never got lost, and checkout was permanent. For many generations, Comanche existed only as a spoken language with no written form. They had perfect data backup systems. It was called having children and teaching them everything. All knowledge, stories, laws, and history were preserved in memory and passed down through oral tradition. They were basically human hard drives with better storytelling abilities than most computers. The grammar structure is complex and very different from English. It uses different word orders, includes sounds that don't exist in English, and incorporates tonal elements where voice pitch can change word meanings. Vocabulary reflected their lifestyle and environment with detailed terms for horses, buffalo, weather patterns, and landscape features. The language included rich ceremonial and spiritual vocabulary. Storytelling traditions used the language to preserve history, teach lessons, and entertain during long winter nights. These weren't simple tales, but complex narratives that carried important cultural information. Today, very few people speak Comanche fluently. But this story has a modern chapter that might surprise you. The Comanche Nation today operates from its headquarters in Lawton, Oklahoma, where it functions as a modern tribal government serving thousands of enrolled members across the country. They went from managing buffalo herds to managing budgets, except modern versions involve more paperwork and fewer arrows. The tribal government provides comprehensive services that rival any municipality. They basically run their own country within a country, except with better health care and fewer bureaucratic headaches. They operate housing programs, healthcare facilities, educational services, and social support systems for tribal members. They've mastered government efficiency, which is impressive considering most governments can't fix potholes quickly. Annual cultural events and powwows have become important venues for preserving and sharing Comanche heritage. These gatherings bring together tribal members from across the nation and welcome visitors interested in learning about Comanche culture. Tribal enterprises generate revenue that supports community programs and government operations. The Comanche Nation operates various businesses, including gaming facilities, retail stores, and service companies. Language revitalization has become a critical mission, with specialized programs designed to teach Comanche to younger generations. Youth programs provide opportunities and guidance for young tribal members. The Comanche Nation's success in balancing tradition with modern progress serves as an inspiration for other indigenous communities. From mountain refugees to legendary horsemen, From nomadic hunters to modern leaders, the Comanche story proves that adaptation and strength can triumph over any challenge.